When some neighbors reported unusual disturbances around Shaquille O'Neal's villa, the police arrived with a warrant. They soon discovered a secret tunnel under the house, but they were shocked when they saw what was inside. The usually peaceful town of Greenville was shaken by an unexpected event. One sunny afternoon, the calm was abruptly shattered by the sound of police sirens echoing through the streets. Curious neighbors heard the commotion getting louder, as if the police were on a mission and heading straight for the heart of the neighborhood. As the sirens grew louder, two police officers came into view, racing toward a grand mansion down the street. The neighbors quickly realized that the destination was Shaquille's luxurious villa. Through curtains and blinds, they watched in stunned silence as the police vehicle screeched to a halt surrounding the basketball legend's home. Whispers filled the air, wondering why the police had arrived. Police officers at Shaq'S house, some neighbors stayed glued to their windows, while others stepped outside to get a better view of the unfolding drama. 4 officers climbed out of their cars and hurried to the front door. One of them knocked loudly, his voice firm and serious. "Mr. O'Neal, please come out. We have a search warrant." Moments later, Shaq himself appeared at the door, towering over the officers, but calm. He greeted them politely, his deep voice carrying over the murmurs of the crowd. The neighbors watched intently as Shaq and the officers exchanged words. They noticed him nodding before stepping aside to let the police in. It was a shocking sight, but to some residents, the scene wasn't entirely surprising. For months, strange events had been occurring at Shaq's villa, things that had left the Titneck community uneasy. In the past 3 months, the neighbors had noticed unusual patterns. Every night, precisely at midnight, large trucks would arrive at Shaq's house. Shaq's villa and the workers, dressed in gloves and masks, moved with urgency, almost as if they were racing against time. No one knew what they were transporting or why, but the secrecy was unnerving. After the strange nighttime activities, even more peculiar events began happening during the day. At least once a week, smaller vehicles would pull up to Shah's house, each carrying large containers. The workers moved quickly and methodically, hauling empty containers inside and emerging moments later with them noticeably heavier. No one had the slightest idea what was being transported in and out of the villa. At first, the neighbors remained silent. The residents prided themselves on respecting each other's privacy and were careful not to interfere in each other's affairs. They watched quietly, observing the unusual activities at Shaq's home without uttering a word. Everyone saw it, but no one dared to ask questions. Question it until things took a turn for the worst. Mysterious beams of light began emanating from Shah's villa late at night. What could that be? The neighbors wondered, exchanging whispers and worried glances for about 2 weeks. The strange flashes appeared, lasting only moments before disappearing. Then, an unsettling smell started spreading through the neighborhood. The stench seemed to originate near Shaq's property, but no one could definitively prove it was coming from his house. By now, the unease in the community was obvious. The incidents were becoming too much to ignore. Finally, the residents decided to act. They called a meeting and, after much discussion, agreed that a delegation from the town's most respected figures would pay Shah a visit to address their concerns. One bright morning, the group arrived at Shah's front door. Their nerves were evident, but their resolve was firm. When the towering former basketball star opened the door, one of them stepped forward. "Good day, sir. We apologize for coming unannounced, but this is a matter of utmost importance. As a gracious host, you invited us inside and offered refreshments, but we declined. We are here not for pleasantries." Mr. O'Neal, one of us, began carefully. "We have noticed some strange occurrences at your residence, and the other residents are growing concerned. So we wanted to check in and ask if everything is all right." Their words hung in the air, heavy with tension. The neighbors held their breath, waiting for his response. Unsure of what they would hear, but desperate for some clarity, Shaq smiled softly and replied, "I understand your concerns, gentlemen, and I'm truly sorry for causing them. But I assure you, everything's fine. There's nothing to worry about." His voice was calm, but the unease in the air was palpable. The guests exchanged skeptical glances, clearly not convinced. They had hoped for a more concrete explanation to quell their concerns. After a moment of silence, the residents felt uneasy. They nodded reluctantly. "All right then, we'll leave," one of them said, wringing his feet. I apologized again for the disturbance and escorted them to the door. I watched as they walked away, their figures disappearing into the evening light. Once they were out of sight, I let out a heavy sigh. The last thing I wanted was to attract attention to my home, but somehow I failed. When the men returned to the concerned residents, they laid Shaq'S assurances. Some were satisfied with the explanation and eager to move on, but others remained doubtful. Chief among them was Ms. Janice, who stood out with her sharp tone and determined expression. "That's ridiculous," she exclaimed, her stern frown deepening. "Something's definitely going on over there." A low murmur rippled through the group. Many rolled their eyes or exchanged knowing looks. Miss Janice's flair for drama was well known, and her determination to dig into other people's business was legendary. She was a wealthy woman who lived 3 houses away from Shaq. She was convinced he was hiding something. Something sinister was whispering among the neighbors. Suspicions were already circulating about the fraud, trafficking, and smuggling. She didn't hesitate to let her imagination run wild, sowing seeds of doubt among the other residents. Rumors spread quickly, carried on the wings of relentless gossip. From her vantage point, Miss Janice quietly observed Shaq's house, waiting for any sign to confirm her theories. Her distrust was not new, forged over years of heartbreak and divorce. Miss Janice had little faith in people, believing everyone had an ulterior motive, to take from or deceive her. Her first marriage ended in betrayal, her husband cheating on her and accusing her of being too demanding and controlling. Her love for him faded, and he left her for someone else. That bitter experience marked the beginning of her lifelong distrust and failed marriages. Deeply skeptical, her second marriage ended because of her own mistakes. Scarred by the betrayal in her first marriage, she became overly suspicious of her new husband. Every text or call he received triggered her paranoia, and she constantly sought to uncover who was on the other end. Convinced that he was hiding something, her husband, frustrated by her lack of trust, tried to address her insecurities, but she refused to listen. She was so consumed by her doubts that she falsely accused him of adultery and filed for divorce. It was only after their separation that she discovered he'd been innocent all along. Miss Janice's third marriage lasted less than a year. This time, the betrayal was real. Her husband had lied about being wealthy, and when she uncovered the truth, she didn't hesitate to send him packing. Furious that he had married her for her money, the experience left her disillusioned and unwilling to try marriage again. Her trust issues remained, and she was hesitant to open herself up to the possibility of love again. As Shaq moved into the neighborhood, Miss Janice's suspicions about him intensified. From the moment he arrived, she couldn't shake off the feeling that something was off about him. She made it her mission to uncover the truth, keeping a close watch on his house whenever she had the chance. She became obsessed with the trucks that came and went, straining to see what they were transporting. But her efforts were in vain. The lack of concrete evidence frustrated her endlessly, fueling her determination. When the residents decided to confront Shaq, she had hoped they would finally get answers, but his vague assurances left her unsatisfied. Determined, she resolved to take matters into her own hands, doubling down on her surveillance and keeping an even closer watch on the house. Weeks passed without any breakthroughs, and her patience began to waver. Then, one night, just as she was about to give up, something caught her eye. She noticed a strange figure sneaking around the back of the house. Filled with renewed determination, she decided to follow him. Heading to bed, something happened. She heard raised voices coming from Shaq's property. Intrigued, she rushed out, her heart racing in the dim light. She could make out 2 figures gesturing wildly, locked in what appeared to be an intense argument. She strained to catch their words, but most of their conversation was lost to the night. However, a snippet reached her ears. "Boss isn't going to like that. You were given specific instructions." Her frustration grew as the rest of the exchange remained unintelligible. Still, it was enough to ignite her suspicion. They were clearly talking about something secretive, and it seemed to involve Shaq. That night, Miss Janice lay awake, piecing together what little she had heard and plotting her next move. She was more determined than ever to uncover what was really happening at Shaq's house. By morning, Miss Janice had made up her mind. She was determined to use the events of the previous night to uncover the truth. About Shaq, she spent the day planning and decided to strike. That evening, the NBA legend had a predictable routine. Every evening, he went on a jog, running to the end of the street and back about 7 times before finishing. That evening, Janice decided to join him. Shaq looked surprised when she suddenly appeared jogging beside him. Before he could say anything, she blurted out, "I know you're hiding something, and I'm going to find out what it is." Her voice was sharp, laced with determination. Shaq glanced at her calmly. His expression was unreadable. "Of course you're right," he replied evenly, his tone maddeningly nonchalant. His lack of reaction only fueled her frustration. She tried to provoke him further, throwing sharp words and accusations his way, hoping he'd slip up or reveal something. But Shaq remained unbothered, either ignoring her jabs or, while jogging, Janice realized that she wasn't getting anywhere, and frustrated and out of breath, she gave up and walked back to her house. Fuming, she sat down to collect her thoughts, and an idea struck her. If Shaq didn't crack, she would force his secrets into the open in another way. Determined, she picked up her phone and made a few phone calls. By the time she was done, she leaned back on her couch with a satisfied smirk. Her plan was in motion, and she couldn't wait to see how it would unfold. She was certain that soon, Shaq would be exposed for who he truly was. When night fell, her plan came to life. The sound of police sirens filled the air, growing louder as they approached Shaq's house. Janice watched from her window, her heart pounding with anticipation as the police cars pulled into Shaq's driveway. Unable to suppress her excitement, eager to be closer to the action, Janice stepped outside and introduced herself to one of the officers. The officers, along with a few nosy neighbors, had gathered to see what was happening. Whispers and murmurs filled the air as they wondered about what might be going on. The officers knocked on Shaq's door, and he opened it with his usual calm demeanor. A few of the curious neighbors followed the police inside, determined to uncover whatever their famous neighbor was hiding. Shaq led the group through his sprawling home, his composure unwavering despite the crowd and police presence. The anticipation was evident as they moved from room to room, everyone expecting to stumble upon some dark secret. Finally, Shaq stopped at a door and opened it, revealing a staircase leading to the basement. All eyes were on him as he motioned for them to follow. What lay below would reveal the truth, or so everyone thought. Everyone watched in stunned silence as Shaq stopped in front of a large, heavy door at the end of the basement. He hesitated. Taking a deep breath, everyone was surprised by the sight inside the brightly lit underground tunnel. A massive fish pond filled with a variety of swimming fish was revealed. Confusion and unease rippled through the group as they realized that this was far from what they had expected. A police officer glanced around, puzzled, while the neighbors exchanged weary glances. Shaq, sensing their bewilderment, began to explain that the fish pond had been built to provide food for nearby homeless shelters. He produced a specific license he had obtained from the county to grow and sell the fish, as well as all the permits he had acquired to build the pond and install the lights inside the tunnel. He described how trucks arrived each night to collect the fish, which were then prepared and delivered to the shelter by morning. The mysterious glow emanating from Shaq's underwater fish pond tunnel had raised eyebrows, but the shallow depth of the tunnel explained its purpose. Translucent sections allowed some light to escape, Additionally, the high-intensity LED grow lights used to simulate natural cycles and promote healthy fish growth were incredibly bright. As Shaq spoke, the story unfolded. He discovered the unused tunnel beneath his property after moving in and decided to turn it into something meaningful. Seeing the struggles of the homeless in the area, particularly at the nearby shelter, he wanted to help without drawing attention to himself. This pond had become his way of making a difference. The mystery of the bad smell was addressed. Shah explained that contamination had once killed all the fish, leaving an unbearable odor that had lingered for days. He apologized sincerely for the discomfort it had caused the neighborhood. Shaq's decision to keep the project private stemmed from his desire to focus on the cause rather than seek recognition. He recounted meeting a homeless woman whose story had deeply moved him. Affected by her past, she had fled an abusive marriage and ended up on the streets with no family or support system. Her daily struggle for survival moved Shaq to take action. "We're sorry for barging in, sir." "We truly apologize," the officer said, their voices tinged with regret. Shaq offered them a reassuring smile. "It's fine," he said warmly, guiding them toward the door. Miss Janice stood silent, her mind racing as she struggled to find the right words. Meanwhile, the other residents approached Shaq, their faces heavy with guilt. They expressed their apologies for doubting him and jumping to conclusions about his actions. Shaq shook his head and gently waved them off. "I would have done the same if I were in your shoes," he said with a soft smile. "You were just looking out for your safety, and that's understandable." The residents slowly dispersed, heading back to their homes. Soon it was just Shaq and Miss Janice. Left standing in the quiet night, I didn't know what to say. Janice whispered. Shaq's smile grew as he said, "I want to show you something." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked back to his house, leaving Janice standing there, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and curiosity. As she made her way home, her shock lingered. Something had shifted inside her. That night, she lay awake, replaying everything that had happened, her heart heavy with the realization of how wrong she had been about Shaq. By morning, curiosity had taken over, and she found herself standing at his doorstep, eager yet hesitant. Shaq greeted her warmly and led her to his car. They drove in comfortable silence until they arrived at a small homeless shelter. Janice's eyes widened in disbelief as she took in the scene. A long line of people, their faces etched with hardship, waited patiently for their turn to receive food from a modest stand set up near the shelter. These people already have so much to worry about. Shaq said, "The least I can do is make sure they don't go hungry." Watching Shaq's selfless kindness, Janice's chest tightened. She felt something deep within her. Her distrust and guarded outlook shifted, and it all seemed small in the face of his generosity. She blinked back tears as they drove away, her perspective forever altered. That day marked the beginning of a transformation for Janice. She started volunteering at the shelter, finding joy in helping others. Slowly, she began to see the beauty in the world and the goodness in people she'd once overlooked. Shaq's compassion sparked something extraordinary in Janice, and together they created a legacy of kindness and change. Proving that even small acts of generosity could lead to monumental transformation. What a shocking revelation. What did you think Shaq was hiding in his house? How do you feel about his actions? Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.